It's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster Diode wiring on a 2025 Buick Encore GX. Now this is going to be available in a few different configurations. We just have the standard diode wiring kit because our neighbors today already had an umbilical, but if you're piecing together a kit and you need that 7 to 6 way, you can join that in with your diodes, and you can pick a few different styles of umbilical, whether it be a coiled cable, a hybrid cable, or a straight cable, really whatever your needs are, but it's a great way to add on those components while piecing it together. You can also get it with a 6-way plug, and which is going to be required for those diodes to work. And really all diodes do is mimic the light signals from the RV's taillights and put them to the factory taillights on the vehicle. And it's accomplished by running a wire from the 6-pole on the front to the back of the taillights, where we splice into the factory wiring and put those diodes in. Those act as a one-way check valve, so there's no back feed to damage anything. And the reason a lot of times people have gone to diodes in flat-toed vehicles is because magnetic tow lights just really don't stick to a lot of cars these days. Being aluminum and also just having something stick on your car really raises the risk of it scratching, and it's one more thing that you have to store. So diode wiring really solves that problem, and a lot of your braking systems are going to require it to tap into it. So really a no-brainer when it comes to getting your light signals on the back of your Encore while flat towing. There's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required at minimum to flat tow any vehicle, and the Buick's not going to be any different, except you are going to need a battery disconnect, or you're going to have to manually pull the battery cable off each time you flat tow. And we installed a Roadmaster battery disconnect on ours today, and it's a great way to do it. But as far as the 5 main minimum components, the first thing we'll have is the base plate, and that's going to attach to the frame of the vehicle and become the structural mounting point for all of our connections, but also allow us to be able to tow it down the road by attaching to our tow bar. And the tow bar is going to be the connection point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. And just like towing a trailer, you have your safety cables that'll go onto the loops on the base plate, and that way in case of any disconnect, you're going to have those cables still holding on to the vehicle. We also have diode wiring, which is going to be cables that run to the taillight on the Encore, and that way when you're running your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights, they're going to illuminate on the taillights of your towed vehicle, keeping you safe and legal. Many braking systems will also require tapping into diode wiring, so it's definitely worth picking up. Speaking of braking systems, we have a Blue Ox Patriot today, but all braking systems are going to have a breakaway cable, and this is in case of a catastrophic disconnect. This cable is going to pull and apply the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop so it's not rolling down the highway. In terms of installation, it's really not that hard to do. You're going to be running a cable from the front of the vehicle to the taillights, and underneath you're going to need to zip tie it all up. The hardest part on this vehicle, I think, was the way that these plugs sit on the taillight, and the pocket that the taillight lives in doesn't leave a whole lot of extra space for the diodes to live. So I did end up extending the factory wiring. You really don't have to be a wiring expert to accomplish this. If you can strip wires and make some connections with spade connectors, it's really not much more than that. I'm going to give you all the wire colors to be able to do it. So if you're doing this at home, follow along and I'll walk you through all the steps. But if you decide maybe this is beyond your scope, you don't have the place to do it, the want to do it, or the tools, or maybe you're not an electrical expert, that's okay. You can use our dealer locator to find someone close to you to get these installed. But for you DIYers, follow along and we'll get your diodes installed on your Buick. When it comes to installing diode wiring, none of it is particularly hard, but if you don't have a lift at home, I think the hardest part is getting the wire routed from the front of the vehicle to the back. And I'll show you the path that I took, but what I always recommend is if your base plate has a spot to mount your 6-pole, grab your wire and tape off a little bit of extra because it's going to mount here. You want to make sure that those wires aren't back. It's going to make it really difficult to make those connections, so you're better to have a little bit of excess. Now, depending on the braking system, if you have a stay-and-play duo or an Invisibrake that you're installing, you're going to want to run that diode wiring up into the engine bay and make a small loop because you will need to tap into those diode wires, and it's a lot easier to do in the engine bay rather than underneath the vehicle. We're using a Patriot today from Blue Ox, which is a portable system, doesn't tap into it, so we don't have to worry about that. So my path that I took, I just simply taped it up, put a zip tie here, and then began to make my way back. Now, I did peel back a long length of the white wire before coming up with a ring terminal and a self-tapping screw to get a ground on the front of the vehicle. If you can find a factory ground, I always try to recommend doing that and keep the grounds kind of consistent throughout your installation. That way, if you do have issues, you can go straight to that ground and troubleshoot it from there. So all of that white wire that I peeled back and cut, I'm going to save that because that becomes our jumper for our running light signal. So it's kind of twofold: to get our ground and to get that extra wire. I do recommend grounding it somewhere under here. Now continuing on, we do have our axles and sway bar here, so just zip tying it up to any wire loom that's factory, or really any holes in the frame is going to be key, but we want to make sure to avoid any exhaust or any sharp or moving objects. That way our wire stays protected. So as I came over our cross member, you can see I used the brackets that are here for our hard lines and just zip tied it to the brackets. And this is a safe path to kind of keep it all protected. And I left the zip ties on here just so you can visually see where it goes. There's some tabs here that I used. And then from here, when we get to our fuel tank, I just went up and then pretty much made my way back, just kind of using this module up here to zip tie before coming to our rear cross member. Once I made my way to the rear cross member, I do need to split off the wires. So our green wire is going to be for our right turn signal. So this is going to head towards the passenger side, and our brown and yellow is going to go towards the driver's side. So I zip tie that up to our cross member and then just kind of made my way over. There's a hole here that I was able to zip tie this, and this will go to our taillight pocket. It's going to stay away from the exhaust. I just mimicked the same path with that green wire on the other side. And then you'll see this white wire. This is that extra that I cut off from where we mounted up that ground wire and ring terminal. And all of this excess is going to be the jumper. So this will go up into the taillight pockets when we pull up our wires. And this I just simply ran where the hitch would be and just kind of kept it to a spot where it's going to stay away from the exhaust. If you need to, you can zip tie that up. But from here, we're going to be pulling our wires up where our taillights are located, so we need to get those taillights taken down. So we'll lower this and we'll start to take those out. To get our taillights taken out, pretty easy. We have two plastic covers that we're going to want to pop off. There's a small groove, so a small flathead screwdriver will allow you to pop that out. We'll do the same on the bottom. And that's going to reveal the T15 screw that's holding it in. And if that screw kind of falls in there, it's kind of a deep cavern. That's okay, because as we pull this out, we'll be able to get that. Now, what I like to do is just kind of bump these loose. And a lot of times that's going to loosen it up into the alignment tabs and make it easier to pull out. Now, if your vehicle's been, you've driven it quite a bit and there's dust, dirt, and debris build up, sometimes it can get a little bit tricky. So if you spray soapy water into those cracks where it can kind of work into that, that will help. But you'll see the alignment tab that I have here and here they're going directly straight back. So when pulling your taillight out, just make sure you're pulling it back, not out. You don't want to damage anything in the process. And at this point, this is where we come to our wiring, and we need to peel this back to be able to cut into it. So I'm just going to pull that out, and this is LED. So if I pull this cap off, we're not really going to be able to separate it. So what we'll do is just kind of keep our taillight safely propped here, and that way we can gain access to our wires. Now I also popped out my passenger taillight, and you'll see that this is wrapped in kind of a sleeve with some electrical tape. There's also this zip tie. We're going to cut this and peel back our insulation. That's going to give us access to the wires that we're going to be tapping into. So just be real careful with this. Obviously, you don't want to cut any extra wires that you don't need to in this process. So if you can gain access by peeling this tape off first, that should make it quite a bit easier. And I've already gone ahead and tested the wire color, so we won't have to worry about that. Pretty easy on this one. Because it's LED, there's only 4 wires, so we'll be tackling the red and green. But that's why it's important to first get this off, because splicing into it is going to be a little bit tricky on here. Not necessarily the splicing, but finding a spot for those diodes to live. So the fact that this has a clip that kind of faces down, we're going to be putting those diodes kind of in this area here. So for that sleeve, we'll just make a small cut and then peel this back. Cutting our red and green wires, and as I mentioned, trying to tuck it down in the taillight pocket is going to be pretty important here because it is tight with the taillight. So just go back 2 or 3 inches and we can cut these. Now On each of your diodes is going to be blue spade connectors. You can pull those off, and we're going to just put those on all 4 ends after we strip them back. About 1/4 of an inch, give or take, is good enough to be able to strip these back. And then with each of your spade connectors, we'll just crimp these down. Now these are pretty small wires, so if you really want to, you could strip back a little bit more and then double them over to get a little bit more bite, but I think we should be fine here. So on each of them, as I mentioned, we'll just take that spade connector and crimp this down. Now make sure you're using the blue ones. There is a yellow one. We'll use that a little bit later. And anytime you make a connection when you're crimping, highly suggest give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's properly secured. You don't want to have to chase any loose connections after it's all hooked up. So I'll get the remaining 3 all put on our wires. Now with the spade connectors attached to our wires, we can start connecting to our diodes, and we'll be connecting 1 per wire, and you'll find that we have an in and an out. The out is going to go towards the ones that are closer to the tail light, so we'll get those plugged in. And then we'll just take the corresponding wire color to what we plugged in, so this one being red, and you can put it on either of the male spade connector portions there. And that covers the factory wiring. Now at this point, the wires that we ran to the taillight pocket, we need to pull up. So I'll be using an airline tube as a pull wire. It's a pretty open shot. I can see light down there. So if you have a string and you tie a nut to it, you can drop that down. And with the fish wire pulled down, we're going to be taping up our yellow, brown, and white wire. So make sure you get all those. And we obviously have a ton of extra wire here. That's okay. We can cut that off up top. But once that's attached, I'll just pull this up, just kind of feed it through until we get our wires pulled up and all the slack taken out. I'm going to leave a little bit of excess here, and we'll still have plenty, but that way there's not a whole lot of stress being pulled on those wires. So I'll just cut these. And then I'm going to strip back each of these wires. Now, we'll be putting our yellow and brown wire together, so if you want to strip those back just a little bit more to be able to wrap those wires together, by all means you can do that. And then when it comes to the spade connectors, I mentioned that yellow one. It's going to be a slightly larger gauge, and that's meant to tie the 2 wires together. So this will become the jumper, and we're going to be tapping into the running lights over there, but putting these together here is going to be the way that we get those all jumped. We'll slide that over, get that crimped down. And then our yellow wire, we'll just get that blue spade connector. Our yellow wire is going to be for our turn signal as well as our brakes. So this is going to tap into our red wire, which we determined to be the stop and turn. So we'll just get that put in place. And then our white and brown will go to that running light, which is going to be our green. So we'll get that attached. And that's really the basics of this side. We pretty much have it done here, but we want to make sure that it's going to, not have strain on these wires long term. So what I like to do is grab some electrical tape and just create a wire strain to where these are all going to stay in place. There's not going to have any tension being pulled on those wires. And then from here, this should be able to allow us to put our diodes into this pocket before getting our taillight put back in place. So I'll get this all taped up and get our taillight in place, and we'll hop over to the passenger side and get that knocked out. On the passenger side, I pulled up our white jumper wire and our green, and I got those attached to our diodes. So easy for us, it's actually the same color, so red and green. So with the factory green wire, I put the white, and with the red wire, I put the green. Now, you may notice that this is larger gauge wire. I have some heat shrink here as well as heat shrink on the back. And what I learned with the other taillight is this is not a whole lot of wire from the factory to be able to get that tucked in here and still get your taillight in place. You may be able to pull out some extra wire from the grommet and extend it to where you can get that tucked in there, but it's going to be a little bit difficult. So if you're not a wiring expert, I totally get it. But if you have some heat shrink and some extra wire, I would extend those wires. It's going to make it a lot easier to be able to tuck these in place before getting our taillight put back in. So completely up to you, but that's the connections that we made. So I'll get this taped up, and then we just need to connect our 6-pole up front. Making our connection on the 6-pole is pretty easy to do. Now you'll see I have my fascia put back on, and I think that's a little bit easier of a way to make sure that you don't have to cut everything out. So with these prongs kind of sticking out, this will still allow us to get everything mounted up, and that's why I left a nice extra length of wire. So to get this all done, you'll need your 6-pole, and if you're diode wiring, if you didn't pick up the kit with this, a lot of times your tow bar will come with one if you're getting a new one, but if you don't have that, you can get these separate here at etrailer. So the first thing, take that boot and we're going to slide it back on the wires. From here, we're just going to separate all of them so you can make a little split. You might be able to peel them back with your fingers. And then we're just going to strip back about 1/4 of an inch on each of the wires. This is also a good time if you are putting a charge line on your vehicle. It'll be tying in with this 6-pole, so have that wire ready to go. And most of the 6-poles are pretty similar to each other. Sometimes you'll have a flathead screw. Ours is a small Phillips, so you're going to want a small screwdriver, because in order to get the wires into these terminals, you'll just back this out. Don't take it out completely, because these are real small, and if you drop them, they're very hard to find. But once you back it out, you should be able to make enough space for that wire to go in, and then we'll tighten it down to hold it in place. And you'll see these molded in letters. That's going to tell us exactly where it goes. So at the 12 o'clock position at the top, TM is going to be tail markers. So that's going to be our brown wire for our running lights. So we'll just make sure all those strands go in there and snug that down. Moving along, you'll find GD, which is going to be ground. So that'll be our white wire. And then from there, we have LT, which is left turn, which will be yellow, and RT, which is right turn, which will be green. So we'll just get our corresponding wires in those same receptacles. And once you have those attached, this is up to you. Something that we do here just to kind of help prevent any breakdown of the electrical connections is put some RTV silicone throughout here. And this is just going to create a barrier, especially for a plug that lives on the front of your vehicle. It's going to be exposed to a lot of different elements, and this is just going to help prolong the lifespan of it. So once we goop that up, we can take our boot and slide that over it. And then going along with that protection, what I like to do is grab some electrical tape and tape this up. And I'll also put some wire loom along this wire just to make it look a little bit cleaner and also help prevent anything from getting in there. So once I wrap that tape around, I'll just hold it there for now. I can then take my wire loom, cut that down to the rough size of what we need. And then we're just going to slide this on. And then at the end, you'll just overlap it and pinch this down to where it's a little bit tighter. And then when you slide that into the boot, you'll be able to tape that up, and it's going to keep it a little bit more protected. Last step is to just mount this up, and depending on your base plate, if you have this style, it's just self-tapping screws that go into those ends, and then we'll snug this down. And before hitting the road, we want to test to make sure that it's working. So if you have your RV handy, best thing to do is grab your umbilical and run through the light signals on the RV and make sure that they're transmitting to the taillights accordingly on your vehicle. But other than that, that's going to do it for the installation of your diode wiring on your 2025 Buick Encore GX.